Oh, first of all, I would like to say how happy I am to be here. It's my first time in Luxembourg ever. And I've been fortunate to come early enough to listen to your talks. Thank you. They were just excellent ones because I'm starting working with IA and Marey. It's not that simple for me. And I just hope that I won't be losing you with my presentation because it's quite different from the ones you got this morning. So as you are all missing some sugar in your blood, I hope that you catch the last part of it to be with me. So today, Jan asked me, and Eric as well, to be speaking about the neural and kinetic adjustments in short-term running, but this will be in unweighting running conditions. Nowadays, we have a French guy who is making us discovering the world from space every single day by his nice pictures, but there have been some others in space, and there will be some going to Mars. And this is really not easy. But why I'm speaking about this today is that you are using treadmills that may unweigh people. And so let's dream a bit and let's go to Mars. But before going to Mars, I would like to come back to the basics about the neural and kinetic characteristics of the running pattern. When you are running, you all know that you are facing, so he told me there is a pointer, you told me green, it's red. So when we are running, you know that in jogging, you may be facing ground impact peaks. This is the vertical ground reaction force. And those peaks, they are varying from 2 to 4 times body weight. So now, as I heard that you want to develop really much research on running, that's why I guess I'm here today. So when you want to be facing such ground impacts, you will be sorry, that was the wrong way. You will be pre-activating in here your gastrocnemius, but also the vasty muscles, because all this chain just belongs to the extensor muscles that will be resisting to the stretch that Etienne was speaking about earlier. So you pre-activate optimally your muscles prior to ground impact. Then what is fairly interesting is that during the braking phase, you see all those muscles being fully activated in order to resist to their stretch, otherwise you would be falling down on the ground. But what is fairly nice is that by resisting like this to the induced hip, knee and ankle joint flexion, the muscle tendon unit, we were speaking about the Achilles tendon earlier with Jan, and the gastrocnemius, but you have the soleus as well in here, will be stretched, resist to their stretch, and then accumulate some elastic energy that will then recoil during the subsequent push-off phase in here. This phase is just wonderful because when you have had the stretch shortening cycle that Paavo Komi was developing so much, and you can see in here vertical force, horizontal force produced at almost no Emg activities, which means that the previous phase is really helping you in the final concentric phase. This makes the running pattern fairly economical because you produce force for not much, and you can smile, discuss while you are running. Bon, now let's go to all the last steps of Eugene Cernan on the moon in 1972. What you can see that is rebounding on the moon. And in fact, this locomotion in microgravity is quite special, and it has been studied in spaceflight, in parabolic flights, I guess you may know some people in here, using different types of treadmills, on which, when you are in unweighting conditions, we needed to get this harness to recreate the gravity force and modulate it. On the other way around, when you are in the on Earth, you have these reduced gravity simulators that have been developed in all kinds of positions in order to prepare the astronauts for the time they would be in space. But if I come back myself now to Earth, you are in here for something today is that I promised that I would be speaking about the lower body positive pressure type treadmill. What it is? This type of treadmill is used for rehabilitation and for training, And it works like this. You get some air flux, slight air flux, within this airtight chamber, which is attached distally to the belt of the person, to the waist. And what is fairly interesting is that by increasing a little bit air in here, you insufflate this chamber and you get then a positive force, which is then supporting the person. What is really interesting in then is that this force, by lifting the center of mass, will reduce the external forces that you will meet at each ground impact and thus reduce the internal work needed to resist to such impacts. And this is so-called said to allow people to start walking and running a bit earlier after being operated, like we were discussing a bit earlier. So is this really interesting? For sure it is. The problem is once you put a person in such a treadmill, it's fully different from all what that person has been living normally. And when they are saying, okay, let's be lifted and I will just reduce the activation to my muscle, and then let's come back to earth and I will increase the activation of all muscles the same way. This is fully wrong, and that's why I'm here today. So if we look at the literature, there has been only a few papers looking at the neural and mechanical characteristics of this running in unweighted conditions. And as compared to the classical harness device that you can see in here, what is clear is that we found, and everybody is finding, this rebound running pattern. You can see an increased flight clearly on this type of treadmill, increased stride durations, quite similar contact time period, leading to this rebounding running pattern. What is really clear and interesting for patients is what? When you are reducing the body weight by inflating this chamber, you get a clear reduction in the vertical ground reaction force. And if you look at this active peak force, this is the force that you will be reaching at the end of the braking phase. If you have been efficient, it will be really high. So this active peak force has been shown to be decreasing linearly with the body weight reduction. You can see it in here, it goes down, which means you need less work to resist to your ground impact. You have been well helped. There are other parameters that are not varying so nicely. When you look at the impact peak force, which may be important for a surgeon, for instance, this impact peak force, when we decrease the body weight from 100% to 75%, you can see that it remains the same. And this may be explained by two parameters. I will show you one now and one later. Another thing which is clear in here, you are at 100% body weight, we decrease by 25% your body weight, the impact peak is similar, then it will be decreasing linearly. And if you look at the loading rate, the way the force is developed in here, it shows the same pattern. This is only becoming softer afterwards. So what happens in here? One first explanation is that people start rebounding. And when you rebound, you come from higher up. So you lead with higher velocities. You get higher impact peak. It's like when you are running downhill. People think that they are running downhill on this type of treadmill, which is not the case, but that may be explaining that. So at first, we should be careful in here, and we may come back to this later. What I have been interested for years with Jan is that we have been arguing, discussing about Emg activity. So let's look at this lower limb muscle activity. If you look at the entire literature, you get 5 papers, and we have only 2 more, and we are dealing now, I hope we'll be publishing some more. There were only, before our works, 5 international papers on the Emg activity on such treadmill, which is just unbelievable. And the first person that published on this in only 2011 said that the activation pattern would be simply preserved. He said that. He put Emg electrodes that we spoke about. He took the overall envelope. You have here the contact and the flight phase all included. So you take a huge, what I call potato. sorry for him. And you see that when we decrease the body weight, you decrease the Emg activity. And he showed that in the thigh muscles and in the shank muscles, there were rather similar decreases in Emg activity. So he said the muscle synergies remain the same, simply down. It's not so simple. So if you look now at Mercer's study, they were at that time showing that when you look at the relative decrease in muscle activity, it's much lesser than the actual decrease in body weight. If I decrease your body weight by 50%, I don't get a reduction by 50%. They also showed this ceiling effect. You see in here, when I decrease the body weight by from 100% to 50, it goes really clearly down in terms of Emg activity, but then lesser and lesser, and you get like a plateau. You see this? Under 40% body weight reduction, you don't get much decreases in Emg activity. You remain roughly with the same one. So it's not so simple. What is even more interesting is this. Those two studies finally differentiated the flight from the stance phase. And then they showed clearly muscle-dependent neural adjustments. You can see in here all those muscles, and this is the body weight reduction. You can see that they don't decrease in the same way, in the same amount. And for instance, what may be interesting some of you is that the hamstrings during the stance phase have been shown repeatedly not to decrease at all. Whereas, so those don't decrease, the vasti are decreasing a lot, and much more than the triceps theory. You see that the story is not so simple. The problem is still that at that time, none of those studies separated what happens during the pre-activation, braking and push-off. And we wanted to look at this. Why? Because when you put a person in such an unusual run, what do you get? You get partial end weighting, this I told you, but you also get an increased flight time, and unfortunately for the person, we don't see how fit. You have no clues about when your foot will touch the ground. So some people who are really tall, for instance, I got one on the treadmill yesterday, did not dare to make long strides. He was running like a small kid, like your dog, the dog of the gala. And I had to tell him, hey, come on, you can increase your stride. That's one thing. So when we looked at all this, we said, okay, this is just impossible that we don't get in such unusual situation. We should get differences among muscles. We should get differences depending on the pre-activation, braking, and push-off phases. And then we started to think. That was quite rare, but in Marseille sometimes we may think. And we're just concentrating on the pre-activation phase in the literature. It's not really simple. In the literature, there was our friend Janavela in Finland, who was making drop jumps in unweighted conditions. And he found that when the people were jumping down like this, being supported higher up, they had a decreased pre-activation. That may be normal. You are supported, you pre-activate less. The problem is, when you get longer flights, either from dropping from higher height, or you have, this has happened to you. You are running and you are facing a drop in the ground. But then it's like, oh, my foot should have been landing and not yet. Then you will be pre-activating more and more and more up to the moment when you touch the ground. So then the pre-activation is higher. And if it happens to you that suddenly you get no light, we just don't change anything. We were running, we just keep on running the way we are used to do in case anything should still work. It was the same with the technology this morning. So you can see that it may be plus, minus, or no change. Good luck. So that's why we started to make this testing protocol. We decided to make 2 running series at preferred speed, 11 heel strikers for a good reason. That was their first time on the treadmill. Nowadays we have seen when they come back what happens. So you had 2 running series of 9 minutes each. The first 3 minutes at normal body weight, the last 3 minutes at normal body weight, but then in between it was unweighted either at 80 or 60% body weight. What we did is we wanted to check the rapid neural adjustments. So we concentrated on the first 30 seconds, last 30 seconds of each running phase. Because people are usually adjusting quickly. Our nervous system is really well done. We wanted to see what happens at first and then later on when we get stabilized. We even recorded stride after stride those neural adjustments during the 10 to 15 strides to go down, what we call the transition phase, and waiting transition phase, and during the reloading transition phase, when we come back to normal body weight. Is there any person in here who has been or has been using such treadmill? Okay, so we will see if we heard and saw the same things, okay? The others you believe. It's my training group and we will compare with the others. So, to measure the vertical ground reaction force, we didn't have your force plate yet, so we put strain gauges under the frame of that treadmill. Now it's prohibited, we can't touch anymore. Those Altogy firms said you don't touch anything anymore. So we recorded the loading rate, the impact peak force, and the active peak force. And of course, we put EMGs only on 6 muscles at that time, the vasti, the gastrocnemy, the soleus, and the tibialis anterior, and we could then separate the pre-ac, braking, and push-off phases. You can believe this can be done. What happened in unweighting phase? Clearly, we saw, as usual, what I told you. Longer flight, longer stride, shorter, enfin, same contact time, so they had this rebounding pattern, and we got the decrease in the vertical ground reaction force. This was just normal. What anyway nobody had been reporting before us is that once you come back to normal body weight, I guess everybody complains, we'll come back to this later, and the second thing is that you keep on rebounding a bit. And 3 minutes later, they were still having a different running pattern than normal. They had been unweighted only 3 minutes, and this can even be obtained with a 1 minute run. So that shows that your brain has already updated the internal model. You have changed. For all those who have been jumping on a trampoline, what people tell you, don't jump directly on the floor. You sit down and go down from the trampoline. It's the same thing. You keep on having this new pattern in your head, and it takes a while before it disappears. That means the brain adjusts fairly quickly. The only problem is it's really not economical. Just try to run bouncing. You will see what you will say pretty soon. I should better come back to my normal running pattern. Okay? So let's look now at those adjustments during the transition phase. This chamber is helping you, so decreasing your body weight in a really smooth way. It works really well. When we look at the forces, you see a linear almost decrease in here in the active peak force. You can see it in here. All those kinetic parameters are decreasing, and for instance, if you take the active peak force, it decreases almost linearly with the body weight changes. You can have all kinds of people in here, you always get the same way, which means the person can be myself, Ian, or someone else, we will get this. So it's the chamber that expresses or leads to the decrease in force, clearly. It's mostly the chamber. The flight time, contact time changes the same. It's explained really well by the inflation of the chamber. So the running pattern is thanks to her. What happens now during the reloading? This was the unweighting, the same thing in the other direction. So thanks to the chamber to make it easy or complicated. Now I come to, I hope you still have sugar. Yes? Let's look at the EMG changes. Alors, would you say now that EMG should be changing all the same way in every phase. If I was convincing you enough, you would say no, okay? But you are right. So they were clearly muscle and phase dependent. I would have never been saying that they should not change during the pre-activation phase. It's just remarkable. You are supported in here, 40% less body weight. You just don't change your pre-activation. Vasti, soleus, gastroc, the same. You would have thought this? No, but me neither. Then when we looked at the braking phase, we got a fairly nice decrease in the vasti, in the soleus, but not at all in the gastrocnemy. And what is nice is some other old French physiologists are showing that there are nice links between the vasti and the soleus. And it's either because we were lesser stretched in the in the triceps array, or lesser stretched in the vasti because you are supported in here. You were saying egg, chicken, I don't know which one is which, but anyway, they work together. If we look at the push-off phase, finally, the gastrocnemius also were decreasing. They were lesser involved in the final push. And this, we could see it at 80% body weight, but when they were running at 60% body weight, gastrocnemius was coming back. We can explain all this. So let's look at this together. Why unchanged pre-activation, although we were rebounding higher? This is what I was just explaining to you earlier. When you face a drop in the ground, in here, like this, your leg would make what we call a leg retraction, which is bigger, passive leg retraction. It has more time to arrive just under your center of mass. Okay, for tout le monde, for everybody. Okay, your leg finishes the movement. It's just under you. You don't need to pre-activate more. By itself, you get the mechanical stabilization. It's just nice. So no need of more pre-activation, but what we get is higher impact peak. Do you remember the impact peak, which did not decrease from 100 to 75% body weight? When you will be higher up, you will land with a forefoot. But when you land still with your heel, they were heel strikers, you get it then higher impact. So depending on the surgery or the rehab, we should be thinking of this. So what happens in on the alter G? It's the same thing. It's not that your foot will land down, or you are supported higher. So the distance being bigger, the foot will touch more under yourself. Is that okay? Why did we get decrease, a late increase? I did not tell you this. In the pre-activation, we only got one muscle, not decreasing, but increasing more, the gastroc. It's normal, because you are higher up, you need to touch one moment the ground. So you are becoming forefoot when you are heel strikers. So they are not running with the same pattern anymore, even in terms of foot contact. Okay? When you look at the braking phase, I told you that they were decreasing VM, VL, soleus. This is during the transition phase, step after step. You see how much it is decreasing. And what is fairly nice is that you get that this decrease in the vasti is nicely correlated also to the decrease in braking force. So I had told you that the bubble, the chamber, explains everything. In the braking phase, the vasti and the vasti also explain this decrease in force. Okay? What about this? This is, I hope, what the physiotherapists will be interested in. I'm just starting a new study on that. During the unweighting and reloading phase, this lasts 12-15 seconds. What we got is that the muscle, so like vasti and soleus, decreased linearly with this, or re-increased with this. They were just wonderfully well following the changes in external force. For those who are using the alter G, what about the sense of effort? Are they nicely following? They are just completely lost. When you put them in unweighting situation, they say, minus 40% of my body weight. I would have never thought. They just feel like minus 10. We are not used on the earth to be unweighted except when we are swimming. So this is just uncommon. It seems that we don't have good sensors to detect the unweighting. So they think, well, perhaps 10 less, but no more. There are people who have the same rate of perceived exertion at 100% body weight, 60% body weight. For me, it's just unbelievable. But it's like this. And what happens when they come back to their body weight that they know every day? What happens for those who are using it? How do they feel? You told me that you had been making this test. Are they like this? It's just killing. They are saying, which rucksack did you put on my back? They feel like, how come it is so heavy? You know this when you take off your shoes and you put the big skiing shoes and you feel so light and then you feel so heavy again and so on. When we come back to normal, it's our body weight, people feel like it can't be my body weight, or I should better lose weight. So it's like Marseille type people, always exaggerating. It's too much, I can't even be running with my body weight, okay? So that means the brain doesn't follow anything in terms of unweighting and reloading. Muscles are following well. So nowadays we will be using these tests. In Marseille Cassis run in 2 weeks, we are testing 24 people, 12 men, 12 women, who will be prior to and after the race running on this treadmill, and we will test if when they are not fatigued, the muscles are following well. I'm not sure that in men and women we use the same thing. We have to check for that. But when we are fatigued, we may not be fatigued the same way. So we will see how much proprioception is disturbed once you get soreness, muscle soreness, we spoke about it. And when you think you have recovered after the DOMS, and you don't have yet recovered. When we were speaking about doping, that's one problem. So there's much to do with this. I have to come back next year or 2 years later. Okay. So let's finish with a push-off. I told you that the gastrocnemius were finally decreasing in Emg activity during the push-off, and it's simply because on this treadmill, when you reduce the vertical ground reaction force, Chang has shown that there is also a reduction in the horizontal ground reaction force. Otherwise, you would not be having the force oriented properly well. So which means everything is decreasing, you need to reduce your push on the treadmill. It's like compulsory, otherwise you fall. So this is interesting, but for physiotherapists, this is even better. At 80%, they were decreasing the gastroc. 60%, so we are lower, okay? Minus 40% body weight. They put back the gastroc. And why? Simply because when they were running on the treadmill, the fact to be unweighted makes that you have lower strides. You are jumping, so you are decreasing your stride frequency. And there are even people who don't want to decrease their stride frequency. They are always having the same muscle activities because they are fighting against the machine to keep their stride frequency. I have such people in Marseille, sorry. But there were most of them at 60% body weight. It was too far away from their normal running frequency, stride frequency, too far. So they decided to fight against the machine to keep back to a closer stride frequency to their normal pattern. You see how complex it is? So from 100% to 80% body weight, you are in the range. It's like homeostasis, where you can adjust without too many difficulties. Going down even to 60%, it's another world. And some people like me, I'm just jumping like on Mars, because I'm just dreamer, and some others, they fight against the machine. So you will see all the temper. That's what we are mixing now with the psychology to check why. There are many people at 60% body weight who say, oh no, I'm not better. Heart rate, the same than at 100% body weight. Can you imagine? So those they should need yoga or to relax a bit. But anyway, so we thought, well, perhaps they are just slow type. They need more time to adjust. We tried. 5 minutes instead of 3 did not change this. Okay, that was just a trial. Jan is saying this. I should not have done that experiment, but we did. But this is the last protocol I will show you. The one we just made last year. More muscles, first run, second run, and we wanted to check if in between those runs there will be, this is first time, this is the second time, there will be changes. Because the first time is always different. What we did there, I go quickly. The running pattern, the EMG changes were really similar in between the two. Yes. But the EMGs were downer in the second run. Didn't you see this in your different treadmills or whatever? First time when we discover a new machine, we are like activating even the ears. Everything is co-activated everywhere. You are tense. Second time, you got more used to, more economical. So they became more economical from the second and third, because we have done also third. The first is just something you should forget because it's just discovery of the new machine. All right? So for your IA, forget the first trial. It doesn't work. If you put your model with this, it's lost. As we had more muscles, we checked for the pre-activation. Clearly what we had is that we got again what we had, the triceps array, but also the peroneus longus, no change, only the hamstrings decrease. And this is really important because it's systematic. The hamstrings are decreasing in pre-ac. They are the only muscles decreasing in pre-ac from all those we have been looking at. And I should just put the rectus femoris, which means that the hip, there is something which is lesser pre-activated prior to impact. Let's look at the braking phase. In here, we got the vastus soleus, but also the rectus femoris, and the gastroc finally were here. So, but the gastroc, it's a gastrocnemius lateralis, and I think I have crosstalk here. It's peroneus longus. But what I want to show you is that decreasing vasti, triceps array, but gluteus and hamstrings unchanged. What does it mean? During the braking phase, hip remains the same. You decrease only the muscles activating or changing the knee and the ankle joint. Okay? That's what I put here. If you look at the push-off, I go quickly, then you are increasing the hip extensors, decreasing the foot pronators. They are doing much less this movement. The fact that normally when we run at normal body weight, we finish on the big toe, you don't need to do it. I don't know if that's for you. The treadmill belt going faster and you're a bit higher, the foot does it by itself. But what is clear is we don't activate these muscles anymore. So if we want to re-educate the peroneus longus, forget it. When you look at the gluteus and all the hip extensors, they are more activated. And the thing is that when you're unweighted, your leg is just going like this behind. Is it that we want to control this movement? I don't know. What is clear is that the synergies are completely upside down. The hip, knee, and ankle joints are not activated the same way in each phase. So I hope to tell you that, you understood with my talk now, that if people want to re-educate people with this, patients with that, good. At first, that's the only thing you can do. But slowly by slowly come back to normal, because this is abnormal running pattern. And when I see now coaches putting their athletes and soccer players on that at high velocities, there are only 2 publications. At higher velocities, you will be using more muscles, but in a different way, and they are using now the slope that seems to be less changing the pattern better than the velocities. And they're combining slope and velocities without knowing at all what they are doing. So I just say, let's be a bit careful with all this, because we don't have an overall decrease or increase of the muscle activities. And my final thing is when you look at the fact that on such treadmill, you would be decreasing your recruitment of motor units. This is just for you, Jan, because he started with this type of studies. The ones that you will be de-recruiting, they are the fast twitch fibers. And those fibers are the ones that maybe most of the time atrophied in case of any immobilization. So if you re-educate in a way that you activate all the fibers except the ones that you need to re-educate, that's my question. I did not say it to those owners. But anyway, I think they will not talk to me anymore. I just adore this machine for studying, but I think that in terms of rehabilitation, we should be more careful. So that's what I put in here. And I think that this type of rebounding running pattern is not the one that corresponds to the one on the earth. I thank you for your attention. They are all dead.